Hello everyone, welcome back to Geek Warning from the Escape Collective. I'm James Huang and I'm here with our full complement of tech editors today. Coming to us from Sydney, Australia is Dave Rome. Hi Dave.
Hello.
And fresh off his brief but productive stint at the Tour de France is Ronan McLaughlin. Hi Ronan.
Hi James.
How's everyone doing today?
Tired.
Yep.
Yeah, no, well, doing all right.
Everyone hanging in there?
I can't complain. I haven't been traveling the world like Ronan, so I really can't complain about tiredness.
I mean, Ronan has at least been sort of staying on his home continent, right?
Yeah, that's true. I also don't want to undersell what the amount of walking and traveling I did of late. So, yeah, technically speaking, same continent. Also, technically speaking, walked the feet off myself, which is great, you know. If there wasn't so much interesting stuff to see, I wouldn't have had to walk the feet off myself. So, good complaint to have, I think.
I think it was, what was it, 47,000 steps at Eurobike?
47,500, Dave, come on.
Sorry, I didn't want to undersell you there. How many at the Tour?
The Tour is a different animal. Let me just check here, but the numbers won't be the same.
I'm going to guess probably not as many steps, but a lot more sprinting.
Yes. And then also a lot more just like sitting in one place, frantically typing. So the biggest day of the Tour was stage 1, unsurprisingly. And that was a 20,500 step day.
Okay. So the pastry to step ratio is much higher at the Tour versus Eurobike.
The pastry to step ratio?
Yeah.
Well, actually, the cake to step ratio was also on the up because it was Kaylee's birthday, so we managed to get him a Hot Wheels cake.
I did see that on the on the social media channels. Indeed, pretty funny. So, better question: did you all eat the entirety of that cake?
So everybody had a normal size slice, and then I ate the rest.
All right. Well, in typical Ronan fashion. Well done. Okay. Well, perhaps not surprisingly, given the timing, today's episode of Geek Warning is going to heavily focus on tour tech. But we've also got some interesting industry news to share and a couple of thought-provoking discussion topics, like how everything mountain bike related seems to be designed for e-bikes these days. But first, a word from this episode's sponsor, and that would be our own Escape Collective members. So as usual, Geek Warning is an ad-free podcast by our own choice. And it's only through everyone's membership dues that we're able to bring this to you each week. So please consider signing up if you're not already a member. And just as a reminder, if you're not sure you want to commit to a full annual membership, we also have a monthly option. And if you're already a member, thanks so much for supporting us. We really can't express how much we appreciate all of you. And if you love what you're getting in return, please tell your friends about us. So maybe, just maybe, some of them can become members too. We also want to give a special thanks to some of our lifetime members who each played a big role in getting this whole operation off the ground. So shout outs this week go to Richard Sachs. Yes, that Richard Sachs. The folks at Belgian ceramic bearing specialist Seabear. Cycling and outdoor industry super PR and media relations pro Kate Geyer. Hi, Kate. Industry veteran Cam Whiting. And former Danish pro road and track racer Casper van Volsack, who is now working with the Uno X team. So thanks to all of you. We really couldn't have done this without you. All right, on with the show. All right, with the news. So, Ronan, we already talked earlier, I think maybe even last week's episode, about some of the bikes that you spotted at the Tour while you were there. And I think one that we didn't talk about was this new Ridley. So we have no info on this thing whatsoever. But what did you see?
Not sure what I seen. Or should I say I'm not sure what I can say that I seen and what I can't say that I seen. I can say what I seen.
Let's start with that.
That is what looks like a new sort of do it all rounder sort of mixed lightweight and aero platform from Ridley. There was Maxime Van Heels and Caleb Ewan from the Lotto Destiny squad were both on this new frame from Ridley. There's no stickers or there's no decals on the frame to indicate what the model name is, and the UCI sticker on it still says prototype. So we have no real indication from the sightings we have at the Tour what the name of this new frame is. but certainly it is not the Ridley Noah Fast, and it is not the Helium. So we can sort of deduce from that it is a new bike from Ridley, and very much in the form of the way we're seeing a lot of manufacturers go now, in that it's sort of the one bike solution for these World Tour teams who are, doing sprint stages and mountainous stages throughout the season. So I like the look of it.
It does look pretty clean.
It does, definitely. And I've been trying to find better pictures, but there's, obviously as the sizes change, you will have slightly different geometries and all that. But interestingly, I initially thought that Caleb Ewan and the other riders on this new frame were on different new frames, because Caleb Ewan's seat stays seem to run the whole way up to the sort of where the top tube intersects with the seat tube, and a sort of traditional place for the seat stays to meet, whereas the other riders on this new frame seem to have more dropped seat stays. So haven't been able to confirm that just yet, but maybe it's just in the much smaller size that Caleb Ewan would obviously be riding. Perhaps it's just a slight tweak in that size.
So what can't you tell us?
Everything that's in the embargo in my inbox.
Okay.
And it's not that I can't tell you just because of the embargo. It's also that I haven't read it yet. So
you've been a little busy running. You've been a little busy.
Yeah, a little bit.
I don't know if anyone is hearing that booming in the background, but I'm currently out on a thankfully a covered balcony recording this, and there's a pretty good thunderstorm going on at the moment. So my apologies if you hear some booming. So thankfully I'm not getting wet though. Anyway, all right. So not a whole lot to share on this new Ridley, unfortunately. Sounds like we'll learn more about it sooner than later. Another thing that you spotted though that seemingly we also don't really have any information about was these new wet conditions tires from Specialized. What do we have there?
These, it's not the first time these popped up. I think we first speculated about these during the Giro this year, when there was some mention of wet tires in commentary of one of the stages there. And when we went sort of investigating that, it seemed like Remco Evenepoel did have wet weather specific tires. And then we heard reports that actually the Amazon Prime series following Deceuninck Quickstep last year at the Tour had some sort of reference during Yves Lampart's prologue win in the Tour de France last year, which was of course run off in wet conditions in Copenhagen, that apparently the directors sportifs there was mention of wet tires, and then the directors during Lampart's time trial were on the radio telling him to trust the tires, push it, trust the tires. I haven't been able to get any photos that you could make out whether or not Yves Lampart did have the same tires on back then or not. But certainly at this year's Tour, despite the dry conditions on stage 1 and 2, I was able to find these new turbo wet tires on the second car. So Soudal Quickstep's second support car had these as spare wheel on the spare bikes on that second car, and yeah, find them quite interesting. I mean, I asked Specialized about them, of course, didn't get much information, didn't get any information really, but just sort of running a finger across these, compared to the normal turbo tires that were on the race bikes, they are a lot stickier or grippier or softer compound, whatever you want to describe that, but noticeably an increased grip just running a thumb or a finger across them. So the tread pattern seems pretty much identical to that Mundo tire that Specialized launched earlier this year. So yeah, presumably whatever they've done there to make this a wet tire is all in the compound by the looks of it.
Yeah, someone mentioned, I think maybe in our Escape Collective private Discord channel, I think, or maybe it was in the comments, someone said something about how kind of wet conditions car tires, I believe, tend to have a higher silica content. So, I mean, that may be something here. I mean, if it doesn't look like there's something obvious that they've done with the tread pattern, then it must be something with compounding.
The one thing Specialized would tell me is that they're only using compounds and materials and ingredients, so to speak, that they're already using in other tires. They're just using them in different combinations, and a tweak here and a tweak there so take from that what you will.
I guess the problem is with that statement that it doesn't tell us anything, because tire companies already do that anyway. So,
Yes.
well,
Yes.
Well, either way,
my question here is, when are we going to see them? If it transpires that Lampard did have them in the Tour last year, that's a full 12 months on now, and with the whole commercialization regulations and all that, surely we're going to see them. Well, presumably pretty soon, you would imagine.
Seemingly any day now. What I'm curious about is, presumably, if it's a wet conditions tire, if they're really only ideally using them in wet conditions, you would expect maybe that the tire probably has more rolling resistance than a dry conditions tire. Who knows what it is in terms of puncture protection with that kind of different rubber compound or whatever. What I'm wondering, however, is sort of, while teams and pro racers obviously would have use for a specific wet conditions tire, I'm wondering how much of a market there is in the consumer realm for a wet conditions tire. I mean, I guess places like the UK and certainly where you are, Ronan, you spend enough time in the wet. Like, would that be something that you would use?
Oh, 100%. Without, for me personally, yeah, without a doubt. And I spoke with Goodyear at Eurobike quite a bit, and one of the things they were saying about their new tires is the improved wet grip. Can't say I've been able to notice it yet. Haven't had a couple of wet rides on the new Goodyears, but they're certainly not. They're not in the other direction. It's not it's not a. But sorry, shouldn't have had the popcorn before we come on. It's not a bad experience in the wet. I just, it's not a noticeably better experience. If these tires were offering something like that, and again, just running a finger across them, they do seem so much grippier. I would be keen to try that. I also think in the right conditions, in the right race, that could be an absolute game changer, and that possibly for Yves Lampard in the Tour Prologue last year, when so many of the favourites were crashing out or having to snail it through corners, he was actually sort of on rails that day, relatively speaking, considering the conditions. And whatever increase in rolling resistance you have on a course, city centre course like that, short distance, presumably the extra grip is going to be more than make up for that. I didn't get just to go back to when will we see these, I didn't get the impression from chatting to specialists that we are going to see them anytime soon.
Interesting. Although I guess presumably for like the UK and Ireland markets and that sort of thing, maybe they'll just be relabeled as the specialized turbo everyday tire. I don't know.
Yeah, we watched the forecast tonight, and I asked my wife, "Was it July or November?"
Well, another thing that this tire kind of brought to mind is, in the mountain bike space, we already have situations where the same tread pattern is offered in multiple rubber compounds to suit either rider preference or local conditions or whatever. That makes me wonder, especially with Specialized in particular having so many different compounds that they use on the mountain bike and the way that they're labeled and whatnot. It makes me wonder if they might offer, they could call one tire dry, one tire wet. But I wonder if they could also presumably just label tires as having different levels of grip versus rolling resistance to suit whatever sort of situation you have.
Their brandings are kind of already aligned to that with the whole T5 and T3. And yeah, I mean, the way they kind of label their compounds already is well aligned to having the door open to that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the approach they take.
I mean, it would make sense. I mean, it'd be... It wouldn't be all that different. I mean, from what Formula One does already. I think a lot of people listening to this will be familiar with that. Just as far as having a soft, medium, hard, or super soft compound, and you just choose the compound that's based on the situation at hand, right? So, who knows? Maybe reptiles will go that way as well. But
I also think if you ask most everyday consumers whether they want more grip or less grip, I think they're going to pick the more grip, even if it comes at a speed penalty.
Yep.
It's only going to be the really discerning, speed focused racer that will care for a tire with less grip that might have a speed advantage for dry conditions. So I think this could potentially become a pretty big seller for them.
I think for the general user, the order of them when they're looking for a new tire, the most important thing is puncture protection, and then grip, and then lastly rolling resistance. And I think most of the time rolling resistance is a very distant third, and that's in those considerations.
Yeah, right. I guess speed considerations in general, it's kind of just more reliability and then security and then speed, if you kind of maybe put it in more general terms. But yeah, I mean, if Lampard really did use those tires that long ago, then yeah, hopefully we'll find out some more about this soon. We certainly haven't heard anything from Specialized yet, but this is the sort of thing where we don't necessarily always get a whole bunch of advance notice anyway. They just sort of an email lands in our inbox, and there you go. So we'll see. Another thing that you spotted from the Specialized camp, Ronan, was a new 3D printed saddle, which they seem to be heading deeper and deeper into. This is not from what we can tell anyway, this is not just like a subtle reskin of one of their existing 3D printed saddles, but it looks like a new model. Do you have any idea what it is?
Yeah, it's definitely a new model. Having got up close to it there and had a look at it, and having a Roman Evo mirror saddle on one of my bikes here. It is definitely not one of those, and it's also definitely not one of the power mirror saddles. And so yeah, it's definitely a new one. It's, as I mentioned in the gallery, sort of flicking through the Specialized website and looking at their saddles. They have obviously taken the Roman name and the power name when they're introducing this 3D mirror technology, and they've used those saddle names and roughly speaking the dimensions and shapes and all that. And the only one left of the current range that they haven't done that with is the Phenom. So
my go-to.
Your go-to, okay. I can't say I've ever sat on a Phenom.
It was originally a mountain bike saddle. So it's sort of only in recent years have they started to not call it a mountain bike saddle, but it's I think it was probably the biggest inspiration for the power in terms of its shape. Like the power is basically a Phenom with the nose cut off of it. So it's a good one. Yeah.
What was, I think, most interesting for me is that it was Fabio Jakobsen was one of the riders using this saddle. Casper Asgreen was the other rider, but Jakobsen in particular was interesting for me because he was previously riding with the Roman Evo mirror, which is, Specialized other 3D printed option. And so, it's not like he's changing from he was already on a Phenom that wasn't available with mirror, and now they have started this, so he started using the 3D printed one. He has moved from another 3D printed option, which I thought was interesting.
I mean, the reality is, and let's see, I think Specialized now has the Roman Evo and the Power. So those are the only two that they offer in 3D printing. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I've ridden both of those, and they do feel quite different. So it's not entirely surprising that that riders have a preference in the 3D printed models, just as they would in the regular ones. But yeah, maybe it is a new Phenom, which Dave, like you said, has become a super popular option on the road too. So it certainly would make sense that it could be a Phenom mirror. I mean, I suppose if Specialized wanted to resurrect an old name, they could bring back the Toupee or something, but I'm not really entirely sure why they would do that at this point. But either way, this new saddle, like if you look at it, it seems to be, to me anyway, like notably flatter from side to side and front to back than the other two options that are out there. So if you're into Specialized saddles and 3D printed ones in particular and want a flatter profile, that might be the ticket for you.
Yeah, and I mean, like again, seeing the saddle, asking Specialized what's this about, getting very little response, and then starting to ask questions that may or may not get a response. It seems like it is a Phenom. It seems like it's something that's going to be. I took from the conversation that it was going to be announced very soon, but I got no details on when it will be or will not be announced.
It seems I might be investing in a mirror saddle.
It's but David,
I don't think it's
not a tool though. So although I guess maybe you can attach a tool to the back of it, would that count?
This I might have to not purchase a tool in exchange of getting this saddle. That's how much I like the Phenom saddle.
Ooh.
I think I've bought about 7 or 8 of them now.
Whoa!
Like I've been collecting them for 7 years, I'd like to say. as when I first started using it. So has been the go-to saddle, and I use the power in between that. But yeah, I'm pretty loyal to that saddle.
Do you put those on test bikes when they come in, or do you test bikes
Yes.
with the provided saddle?
No, I'll actually typically test the initial original saddle first, and then I'll quickly swap because it doesn't feel right, and then I'll do the rest of the testing on with a familiar saddle. So I have a lot of spares for that purpose, so I don't have to take saddles off my own bikes.
Well, if I ever come across a spare Phenom, Dave, I'll be sure to put it aside for you.
Please do. Yes. I collect Phenoms like I do Allen keys. And yeah. You mentioned the toupee before, and I don't think that name will come back, because my understanding with it was actually an inside joke amongst the body geometry crew at Specialized, is that it was just basically a bald saddle with a little padding on top. So it doesn't really fit for what the mirror is. So,
yeah, fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Very fair. All right. Well, another new thing that you spotted, Roner, we're pretty sure it's a new thing anyway, that we also don't have any info about. SRAM's current Red group set still worked great, still widely used, but it seems like it's due for an update, and we maybe got a little hint of that in a cassette, right?
Yeah, I mean, had you asked me at the start of this year, I would have said we'll see a new SRAM Red before the tour. Then we've had so many other SRAM announcements so far this year. I think at this point none of us were expecting a new SRAM Red at the tour, and lo and behold, we didn't get one. But what I did spot on Jonas Vinigo and on Wout van Aert's bike, and I couldn't find on anybody else's bike that I had time to check for, is a new cassette. And I asked the folks at SRAM, what's this cassette? And I was just told it's 1036, and I was like, yes, it's the ratio, but what is the cassette? And I was told again repeatedly it's a 1036, until eventually I got a no comment.
SRAM is very good at giving non-answers for things. Very, very good.
I mean, like, it was clear that it wasn't. I was saying to Dave earlier, it looks a bit like the new transmission cassettes or Eagle cassettes or whatever you want to. That mountain bike stuff that you guys like. It's like one of those new cassettes. It's hollowed out. You can see from the rear that it's quite a bit more hollowed out than a typical SRAM Red cassette. It doesn't have any sort of decals or text on it to indicate what spec it is, but you would have to imagine in that 1036 ratio that it is a road cassette, and given that it is on two of the biggest stars of one of the biggest teams in the Tour de France, including the defending champions, it's not some lower spec cassette. It's a pretty high spec cassette, you would imagine. Looks pretty lightweight and is entirely different looking, at least from the rear looking at it, than the existing SRAM Red cassettes.
Yeah, because I was just about to say the giveaway for us was just that it did have sort of a different graphic pattern on that aluminum backplate.
Yeah. And they're using that in a 2x configuration?
They were using that in the 1x.
1x, okay. All right. So it's nothing, it's in that sense, it's not too different to explore.
Although
that you can currently use.
Although the current 1036 is offered, I mean, it is primarily designed as a 2x offering. It's like the SRAM Red wide, sort of.
For wide, yeah.
Which, in and of itself, I think it's pretty cool that we have a cassette that has that much range to begin with anyway. I haven't done the calculation to see what the equivalent would be if you started out with an 11, but that's a lot of gear range in a 1036. So again, like, those pro riders are using it in a 1x, but for 2x, for like sort of just everyday riders, that's a lot of range.
Yeah, I should mention that while that 36 tooth cog, that aluminium cog, looks a lot like aesthetic wise and the way it's milled out like the new transmission mountain bike stuff, the key feature with transmission cassettes is actually that narrow, wide tooth profile. That you see on all of the cogs except for the middle setup cog, and this cassette doesn't have that. This cassette's pretty standard in that regard. So that's not to say we won't ever see that narrow wide stuff come to the road, but it's not here.
Yeah, and just to go back to your 1x or 2x question, like Jonas Vingegaard was riding today's stage in a 2x setup, and at least from the photos that I was able to look up online, looks like he's running, one of the existing SRAM Red cassettes there. And as for the days that I seen them with this new cassette, Jonas was on a 50 tooth, White was on a 52 tooth, both on 1x. So yeah, I think it certainly looks like a lighter weight option with the the part that looks to me like the new Eagle cassettes is the hollowed out nature of that backing plate, and that presumably is some sort of weight saving measure.
Well, like you said, Ronan, we have seen updates on basically every other SRAM Road group set at this point. So yeah, Apex, Rival, and Force. So yeah, Red is next, presumably.
Yeah, I think we should probably explain why we're asking if this is the first indication of a new Red group set. It's because it does look so aesthetically different to the existing. It is a big detour there.
Yeah, it's also like, for anyone that hasn't been following, it's Red is now the oldest group set in the lineup. It's Force has all the best features of Red, basically, and like Force was updated earlier this year to have all the lighter and better improvements of Red, but what took things further with the improved lever ergonomics. And so in a sense, Red's kind of just this sitting dead duck in a way, because a lot of people building new bikes are opting for Force rather than SRAM's top end group set, which is a bit more dated and a bit more clunky feeling.
Is this the start of trickle up technology?
I think it's trickled down, making room for something wholly new. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, we can speculate away on that one. Well, so again, yet another product that we'll have to wait for some more official information on. Continuing on.
Shall I blast through the other few new things that I've seen? Because
yes,
I think we could be here all day, couldn't we?
We could be. Well, there are only like a couple of other things on my list, but please, by all means, have at it.
Well, I mean, I can also blast through them because, there just is no information on these things. But there is, at least Jacopo Guarnieri was wearing what looks like a new pair of Q36.5 road shoes. It did say unique on the sole, and looking from the side, the carbon sole did look the same as the unique shoes that Q36.5 currently offer, but the upper was entirely different. Looked like a sort of a knit construction, presumably more breathable, maybe lighter, not sure, but definitely a new pair of shoes there that is not on the Q36.5 website. Ekoi.
Either of you used those?
Both
of us actually.
What's that?
Both of us have used them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm pretty, if I remember correctly, Ronan, we both had the same opinion of them for the most part. That the shoe itself seemed really good, and the really really squishy Cytec developed insole was a little too weird.
And that insole has been updated or changed since, and there's like a silver edition of those Q36.5 unique shoes that comes with an entirely different insole, if I've got that the right way around. It's either the colored version or the silver version, but one of them comes with a much more typical insole that you might find in other shoes. But yeah, like with my own insoles, they're not my go-to shoes, but I would use them regularly enough. Just depend if I'm running my Asioma pedals, I've still got Lukio cleats on those Q36.5, so I'll throw them on. And every time you put them on, you get that same sensation of just how comfortable they are to wear before you get on the bike. They're just not. They don't give as much support, I find, as you really want in a pair of shoes. But yeah, everybody's feet is different, so that was just my experience. The other new thing that I've seen from French brand Ekoi is a new aero helmet, and I would say that sort of I think there is some details that have come out on this helmet since. I haven't had a chance to read up on it, but at the time that I seen it, it was the first that I'd seen it. All the Ekoi teams in the race, and I think there's about 3 or 4 teams in the race this year using their helmets. Were running this new aero helmet, and it sort of struck me as a blend of original aero, like way back 10, 15 years ago, and modern aero, in that the front half was just like a closed off helmet with 3 vents, the type of aero helmet you might have found 10 years ago when when we first started seeing these things. And then the back is very, very modern looking with the sort of downwash effect flow to the rear of it, very much like the new Trek Ballista helmet, if I remember the name right. And you've got this huge big sort of port at the back, sort of like I think Met called it a diffuser or exhaust port or something like that. And this one does look actually looks more like that. So I found that an interesting looking helmet. I dare say the riders might find it quite warm on a day like today in the high mountains, and haven't had a chance to check today which helmet the Ekoi riders were wearing. And then lastly on the list of new things that I've seen was new Campagnolo Bora Ultra WTO 45 wheel set. It looks like the only difference there is actually they've just increased I'm presuming internally, but they've definitely increased the external width of that rim. And that's, when did we first see those wheels? Like 2018, when most people were using a while back. And I have a set since 2019 of the 60mm deep WTOs. So I'm pretty sure they were around for a while before that. And, most riders' tire choices in terms of width have increased quite a bit since then. So it would probably make sense that we're seeing a new wider version of that wheel. But otherwise, looks identical. They've retained the G3 spoke pattern. Decals are identical. I was sort of alerted to this when I tried to measure the tire width, and I was almost banished from Europe by the AG2R staff member who spotted me with the vernier calipers. And then that alerted me I was like, whoa, if this guy's reacting like this, have they got something to hide? And then there was like a red dot on the hub, little sticker that they put on. It was only on, I think all the riders were using the 45mm rims, but it was only on 2 of the riders' wheels. And I was like, what's different there? And then looking a bit closer, it does seem like a wider rim on those new wheels.
Okay, so clearly what we need to supply Ronin with are some smaller calipers.
Yes.
Some
camouflage.
transparent ones.
Yeah, transparent or camouflage print or something like that. Something a little less conspicuous.
If only we knew someone who could recommend a set of calipers.
All right, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, start looking.
I'm going to start looking into accurate laser-based tools so you can do it from a distance.
Perfect.
Get Q on the job.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's all we have for tour-related tech. Is that right? I mean, it's a pretty good list.
The one other thing we wanted to mention there was just the integrated Shimano satellite shifters on Uno X teams. They're sponsored by Dare, a Norwegian brand of bikes, who have their own integrated handlebar and stem. And built into that, they have these sort of it's on the tops, and that's, I think, at least I call that the climbing shifters. So there used to be climber shifters way back in the day, and sprint shifters. Now they're just all the same, and you put them wherever you want. But the Uno X team bars have them integrated into the tops, which was a pretty neat solution, I thought.
It's a really clean solution for sure, and honestly, it's one that I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of, considering how much companies like to incorporate everything or like build everything into carbon structures now. I am a little surprised that we haven't seen more of that. Although I guess it would also kind of preclude a rider's ability to move those buttons where exactly they want them.
Well, we have kind of seen it before, and the Pro offers some sort of integration of the satellite shifters, if I remember correctly. That one's just off the top of my head, but definitely the Lapierre bikes that Groupama FDGA are riding also have like an option for an integrated climbing shifter there. At least as far as I spotted, none of the FDGA riders are actually using those, or they're either not using it, or whatever way Lapierre have integrated, you don't actually see the Shimano trigger. They maybe have built in their own button or something. I'm not sure, but there's definitely climber shifters built into the tops of the Lapierre bars also.
Gotcha.
I have a bike here for test, a Polygon, which uses a handlebar from a company called Black Tech, with, of course, being cycling. There's no vowels in that, and seems like a very similar bar. And this handlebar I have here has like little rubber port covers over exactly where, this handlebar that you're talking about has its sprint shifters placed. So I'm thinking potentially that handlebar you're looking at is just rebranded of something else that's readily available in the market, and that it's a relatively common feature already.
I mean, it
Just
very well
no
could be.
one's thought to use those ports for that.
It'd be slick. It'd be a great use for those ports, especially if they're not being used otherwise. So,
Yeah, because I assume that those ports were there for mechanical shift housing as an exit point in case you needed to run mechanical shifting through this integrated bar. But
right, or just external brake hose for a bike that doesn't have fully internal routing.
Yeah. Which either way would be a hideous thing to do, to have the cables exit midway through the back of the bar. But it's I don't know, it looks to me there's a lot of similarity between these two bars. And I should look into that.
Wouldn't be the first time that something has been rebranded, I dare say. See what I did there? All right, well let's wrap up the tour tech here. As I think we've gone through quite enough of all that. Ronan, I have to say you were quite, as I mentioned earlier in the show, you were quite productive considering how little time you actually spent on the ground over there. So well done. Well done.
At least one more gallery to come also, probably two, and a bit of a deep dive. So, I mean, if I can recover from the deep fatigue, I will get those typed up starting tomorrow, but not making any promises.
That's fair. I think that would be perfectly okay. I think you earned a little bit of time off here, but not too much time. Chop. You got some stuff to do here, Ronan. Anyway, moving on from non-tour tech news, kind of a big one. I guess these are kind of more business related. Pinarello was recently sold. So it was purchased last in, 2018, I think it was. I guess it was 2016. It was basically owned by LVMH, which is basically the holding company for Louis Vuitton. And back then, it was purchased for about 90 million euros. And now Pinarello has been sold for, I believe, an undisclosed amount to a private family office, which, as Joan Lindsay, also a member of our staff on Escape Collective, he so astutely pointed out, is sort of just a code word, so to speak, for basically just like a really rich individual person or family, someone with a lot of money. So again, we don't really have
like every Pinarello owner.
Yeah. We don't have an absolute confirmation on the transaction amount, but it has been reported in the Financial Times that it was 250 million euros. So LVMH certainly made a pretty penny on this one. And Fausto Pinarello, this is unofficial information, still has retained, I believe we've heard 19% of the company. So he still owns a fair chunk of that. And the rest of it comes from a South African billionaire, Ivan Glassenberg, supposedly. So
that's rumored, right?
That's rumored. It's not like none of those figures are confirmed. I should be very, very clear on that.
Or that individual is
correct. We do have pretty good word that they were in negotiations, and they seem to be the ones who were most likely to have inked the deal, but that again is not 100% confirmed. But either way, the interesting part here is that Pinarello has been sold. So we don't have any information at this point, as is often the case when a company is sold. They haven't even really put out as much of a statement saying what the plans are for now. If they did, I'm sure it would say something like, everything's going to stay the same, it's going to be fine, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But we all know that's not going to happen. So the question is, what happens from here? Pinarello clearly is primarily interested in very, very higher end market. If for no reason other than the fact that it used to be owned by Louis Vuitton, I think it seemed pretty clear that they were positioning it as a luxury brand. Does Pinarello stay where it is? Do they move even further upscale somehow? Do they kind of move mass market? What do we think might happen here? Because I don't know, if I were sinking 200 million euros into a brand, I'd be looking for some sort of return on that investment, wouldn't I?
I am far from an expert in this, but I think they continue on a similar track to what they're on. Luxury,
they seem to be doing well.
Yeah, and the luxury goods market is one market that is not affected by the sort of financial cost of living crisis that many people are unfortunately living through at the moment. On top of that, you've got Fausto Pinarello retaining a large percentage stake in the company here, and we've heard how involved he is in the day-to-day running of that business, how involved he is in even everything down to, designing new frames and, right down to, the engineers, and that will say, here's the frame we've come up with, present it to him, and he will sign off. And it's so long as it gets an extra curve here or an extra curve there. And that's not actually, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, he is, intent on retaining the Pinarello signature image. And I would imagine he will continue to do so if he still has a 19% stake. So I would say similar track.
I guess he does sort of project the image of a company owner or principal who is kind of one of the first into the building and one of the last out of the building.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. They're a brand that actually understands branding is probably my takeaway of Pinarello, is that like BMC used to always claim that if you were in a room full of hundreds of bikes and the lights were turned off, that you could find the BMC. And I think Pinarello is certainly in that same vein, where it's a Pinarello, and yes, from an engineering point of view, maybe some of those curves don't necessarily only equal performance, but it is a brand that sticks out, and I think the company will probably continue on whatever trajectory is required to ensure that brand remains individual and remains separates itself.
Very, very consistent and distinctive design language for sure.
Yeah. So but I mean, they've recently expanded into mountain bikes. So I mean, there is the precedent at the moment for them to continually expand beyond selling dogmas. So it's I think we'll probably see them grow as a brand to encompass more bikes.
I mean, when you have companies like Lamborghini and Ferrari and Aston Martin making SUVs, it's not a big stretch to see a company like Pinarello moving into the mountain bike
cargo
space.
Bikes. Oh, okay. We were thinking different things.
I don't know about the cargo bike thing, but yeah, I mean, some sort of expansion is not out of the question, I would think. But yeah, we'll find out in the years to come.
The Pinarello Camel with multiple humps.
That I'm pretty sure we're not going to see. That would be my guess,
okay.
Dave. That would be my guess.
Right.
So another piece of business news, Dave, this is one that you came up with. What is going on with Tune?
Tune, the German company best known for its weight-weenie components. They do all sorts of things. I mean, they're probably best known for like their quick releases and for their hubs and their
brilliant print catalogs.
Yes, they do. They do a good photograph here and there. They are from the Black Forest of Germany, and they have been acquired by the same parent company that owns Lightweight. So it's sort of a composite manufacturing specialist company based in Friedrichshafen, which is the original home of Eurobike, or the home of Eurobike for many years. And they've acquired them. So I mean, you've now got Lightweight and Tune in the same business, which is kind of intriguing, because you can imagine that Lightweight will soon enough perhaps move away from using DT Swiss internals in their hubs and perhaps start using something from Tune and become even lighter.
Synergies, Dave. Synergies. What is kind of neat about this acquisition is that it actually does kind of seem to make a lot of sense, because there's not a lot of overlap between the product lines between those two companies. I mean, Lightweight is still primarily just a high-end wheel company, right? Whereas Tune, as you mentioned, Dave, they obviously do hubs, and a whole bunch of hubs, I should say. But they do like stems and handlebars and seat posts and bottom brackets and a bunch of accessories. And like, they have all sorts of stuff. So
carbon fiber coffee cups. They've got a surprisingly diverse product line there. But
also usually focused on low weight.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, like, again, this company acquisitions sometimes don't really seem to make a whole lot of sense, but this is one that actually I could see working.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. So, and yeah, I'm keen to see it because Tune historically has done some really cool product, and to have some what you'd assume is further investment in them could result in some really neat stuff, especially given the composites ownership now. So I'd imagined, perhaps we'll see more, carbon usage, and Tune's traditionally been a lot of CNC machining, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
And who knows, maybe we'll even see a bit of anodized aluminum color in lightweight products, which would be a very big departure from the norm. All right, well, let's wrap up the news part of this show today.
Can I add one more?
Oh, Dave's got one more. What you got, Dave?
Garbaruk.
Yes.
The machining, aluminium machining specialists, I guess. They're best known for their chain rings, and they've not so long ago expanded into cranksets, and they've just released a road and gravel crankset. So why I'm quite excited about this is, it's not terribly expensive. It's $420 for the crankset, and it's basically, if you've ever seen the Cannondale SISL crank, which is like a 2 pieces hollowed machined aluminium that are then bonded together, basically that. So they've recreated that, which is something FSA also does. But yeah, I like it. It looks nice. It's not terribly expensive. It's pretty light. And it comes in a range of pretty colors, and you can mix and match. Like the lock ring, the self-extracting lock ring color. You can mix and match the crank arm color. You can mix and match the chain rings, which are also available in certain colors. So I think it's quite an affordable way to add some serious bling to
relatively
whatever
affordable
bike you use. Relatively affordable. I mean, $420 US it's not small money, but I mean, you compare it against a lot of other high-end boutique cranks, which are known to add an aesthetic value to a bike, and it seems quite cheap.
I don't want to disappoint you here, Dave, but I've got a little bit of bad news about this.
Oh no.
Q factor 152.
152. Dear God.
So,
although I think that's the way. Okay, so it's wide for gravel, but I think it's it's wide for road, but I think on gravel bikes that's
not,
kind of the
not
way
too
things
uncommon.
are headed.
Yeah. Because I also have a set of King Creek E-Wings titanium crank arms, and those also have a notably wide Q factor, like 157, I think might be.
Yeah.
So like a good 10, 15 millimeters above a typical narrow road crankset. It is it is noticeable. Yeah. Is it a deal breaker? Hasn't been for me, but something to note. Nonetheless.
And most gravel bikes are adopting that wider system that SRAM introduced a few years ago. We saw it on the Lauf Siegler first, and it seems to be becoming the new norm, especially as we're seeing bikes adopt UDH.
I have been using that Miche. So after I said Miche the last time, someone corrected me, and
I believe you said Miche. I believe you said Miche is what you said.
Well, whatever I said, I think most people understood that I was talking about Miche. And had I said Miche, maybe most people wouldn't have understood that. But anyway, those cranks, Pistarde Airs, one of the things I like most about them is 138mm Q factor. It's I really like it's noticeably nicer for me anyway.
Isn't that quite slow given it hits the chainstays every revolution?
No, only for the initial few rotations, and then once you've eaten away most of the chainstay, you're fine.
Okay.
Right, and then you get a nice little whistle to let people know that you're coming.
Yeah. No, it does restrict the chainring size, but it restricted it to a 156 or to a 56 instead of a 60.
Well, Dave, your mentioning of Garbaruk actually is a perfect lead-in for our On Your Mind segment, because I've actually got a couple of things on my mind. So I think we've got time to discuss some pretty decent list that we've got here. One of the things that I've noticed, particularly in the last couple of years of handmade bike shows and just kind of like going to trade shows in general, is we really have seen a return in CNC machining as a widely used form of manufacturing. So we all know that 3D printing has kind of been on the upswing, but 3D printing is expensive. CNC machining, however, is a lot more accessible, and we're seeing an awful lot of it. Is this a good thing, or is it just kind of a thing? Because there were reasons why it went away in the 90s.
What were those reasons?
I mean, essentially what you're looking at is if you kind of think of a block of aluminum as like a piece of wood. I mean, people think of aluminum as this very homogeneous material, but ultimately it's made up of sort of like individual little crystals. You can kind of call them grains. And when you have them in a forging or billet or something like that, all those little things are aligned. And when you machine away material, you're sort of just kind of cutting through all the little grains and cutting through that structure. And you're, at least on like kind of a microscopic level, you're kind of compromising in some sense the strength of the material. Whereas with forging, you're sort of just squishing everything together. So those grains are still intact. They're just sort of like kind of like reformed. That was one of the big reasons why Shimano, the original first generation Shimano XTR, kind of put a lot of those CNC machining companies out of business back in the 90s, along with the fact that it just worked better. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing an awful lot of CNC machining now. So we have, Dave, like you said, that Garbaruk company. I was looking at this.
3Dev.
Yeah, 5Dev. 5Dev.
5Dev. Yeah, that makes more sense.
And then like Industry 9 has has their own stem. And I was looking at this German company, Acto5, the other day at Eurobike. But there's an awful lot of it out there. And I think it's awfully cool that we have all this additional choice and there's all this extra creativity going on right now. And it does seem like the reliability is better, thankfully. Like, it seems like before, a lot of these companies were just starting from like cast billets or something back in the day. But the impression that I'm getting now is a lot of these companies are now starting with at least sort of like near net forgings, which is better. But yeah, either way, I mean, just it's something that I've noticed for sure. There's an awful lot of CNC machine stuff out there.
Yeah, I think like the technology is obviously more accessible than before. I think the technology's also come a long way. Like the capabilities of CNC machining is pretty sophisticated these days with the 5-axis machines that are now pretty readily available. So you can actually machine components far more efficiently than you ever could and more intricately. But I also think it's low risk manufacturing, right? Like it's small batch manufacturing, so you can really produce almost on demand, and not have to have big investments in forgings and more traditional mass manufacturing methods. You can really just produce what you need and hit go again when you need more, and change the design when something starts to break. And yeah, I think I think that's probably quite attractive for a lot of these smaller businesses that have perhaps come up through other industries or just want to get into selling products without huge investment. So yeah, I think it's that, and obviously 3D printing comes into it at a similar angle, but that technology is just vastly more expensive still.
Yeah, I guess I have a test frame that is coming in sometime in the next few weeks, I think, from a new Canadian brand called Framework. I think I mentioned them on the podcast before, but it's in-house filament wound carbon tubing, and then it's all CNC machined aluminum lugs, all custom done. He's got a pretty cool parametric model going for all that stuff for his frame designs. But yeah, that's all CNC machined as far as the joints are concerned, and it is the flexibility of the machining and the design is without a doubt the most appealing part of that manufacturing method. Because if you were to do all that with traditional mitering and welding or forging, that sort of thing, like you said, Dave, it would be an awful lot of tooling, or it'd be a lot more limited in terms of what you can offer. But yeah, I mean, as someone who came into cycling kind of more in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s sort of thing, then this is all, a lot of the stuff is kind of tugging at the heartstrings here, because it's definitely an aesthetic that I'm very well familiar with.
Yeah, I think the return of Anno is probably in a very similar vein, where we've kind of hit the repeat button on having everything available in every color. I personally don't think it's all that sustainable as an industry. I think the industry does this where they expand into offering every product in 8 different colors, and then realizes that they necessarily sell as much as a result of it, and that distributors can't afford to carry each chainring size in 8 different variants because you end up with hundreds of different chainrings. And yeah, so I suspect we're probably in a temporary phase of excitement for anodized colors again, and we'll probably see it return back to silver and black at some point.
Or at least companies seem to be smarter about it, because it seems like they're doing them in smaller batches, or they're kind of doing them a little bit more on demand in terms of the anodizing.
Yeah.
And then like that company that you mentioned earlier, Dave Garbaruk, yeah, they do offer cassettes, for example, in not custom, but in a variety of anodized colors. But it's just for the backing plate. So it's not like they have to have the entire thing anodized in a particular color, so they can kind of mix and match a little bit, like, keep a bunch of different colors of backplates on hand and then just stick them together depending on what people want. So it does seem like people are being smarter about it, which is good.
Yeah. It also helps that, the selling method is completely changed. A lot of these CNC machined and anodized companies are doing sort of consumer direct sales, so they can really control that sales channel. So perhaps that'll help keep the purple anno alive for longer than I think it will be.
I do like purple anno, Dave. I do like it. All right, who else has got something on their mind today?
I have a very quick one. This segment was originated from something on your mind, but over the heads of your family. And yeah, I came home, I think it was from the tour, and pulled a new test bike that had arrived out of the box, and immediately wanted to go in and tell someone that this road bike that had arrived at my house has UDH on it. But I mean, that was over the heads of everybody in my house. So I'm telling you guys now.
I mean, we've mentioned this a couple times on previous episodes of the podcast. We were, I guess, a while ago, we were speculating if UDH, this SRAM's universal derailleur hanger format, would become more of a thing for drop bar bikes. And basically in the last few, I guess even just the last few weeks, it's become very clear that it's not only going to become a thing, but it already is a thing.
Pretty shocking how quickly it's being implemented.
Well, I think it's just more that it's probably something that had been in the works for quite a while, and now is when all those bikes are finally ready. I think that's pretty clear. But the big motivator obviously has been SRAM's transmission setup, and at least for gravel bikes, it allows for people to run the new transmission rear derailleur on their mullet setups. But what is intriguing is seeing UDH being used more widely on road bikes that will never see one of those Eagle transmission rear derailleurs. So
yeah, this is something I speculated when SRAM released their transmission, which takes the place of that UDH derailleur and sort of sandwiches around the dropout, which is if or when we see it on road bikes, then that is writing on the wall for SRAM doing the T-type derailleur, which sandwiches the dropout as a road version, which would be stronger. It potentially more tucked underneath the bike, so it could potentially be more aerodynamic. The strength for me is enough reason to do it, because I could imagine, someone in the World Tour actually crashing drive side down on the bike and just jumping back up and getting going again without a bent derailleur, which would be a huge difference from what happens currently. Yeah, but it seems like that speculation is now becoming true, dare I say.
And just to go back to that Ridley that we mentioned earlier, also, one of the things I forgot to mention was that it also has UDH on it. And one of the things that we spotted in that gallery mining from the tour was just how wide the seat stays in that have to flare out, presumably to accommodate the UDH.
Yeah, I saw you mention that in the caption, and actually looking at how a lot of the mountain bikes do UDH now, I don't think that flare has anything to do. I don't think that flare has anything to do with the rear derailleur, because you actually don't need any room up on top of the dropout for the derailleur. My guess is that's probably a play towards some sort of compliance feature. That's my guess, anyway. But the big thing on the road that I've talked to, the concern that people seem to have from a road frame designer point of view, particularly on metal frames, is just how wide those dropouts or how thick those dropouts need to be according to the SRAM spec.
Darren Baum's mentioned that before.
Yeah, it's not a huge deal for companies that deal primarily in carbon, because we've already seen a whole bunch of frames that seem to do that pretty elegantly. Like Ronan, you mentioned that on that Ridley. Felt is about to drop a couple of new bikes that have UDH. I have a Rida Esprit test bike here that I'm wrapping up that has UDH on it as well, and those are all done pretty neatly. Like it really doesn't look kind of ungainly or bulky or anything like that. But I could see how it would look a little bit disproportionate on definitely on a steel bike, but probably also on a titanium bike as well.
So the big question I have is SRAM announced the universal derailleur hanger and the mountain bike as like this kind of savior to having so many different derailleur hanger types. And then it took about 3 years of implementation of that. And we saw pretty widespread adoption from the industry in that time. Like 3 years was enough for just about every brand to release a UDH bike. A couple missed out, but they'll probably get there in the next iteration. And then we saw them introduce their drivetrain to make use of that mount. We were just talking previously about new SRAM Red coming at some point. Like it's due for an update at this point. Do we think it'll happen? Do we think it'll use that UDH this iteration? Because my gut feel is it won't.
I don't think it will, just because there hasn't been the adoption rate on the road has definitely not been as swift as it has been on the mountain bike side. And obviously that is a prerequisite to being able to implement something like that, a derailleur like that, like the T-type derailleur that you were talking about, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
So with so relatively few brands showing road bikes that have UDH on there, I'd say we're probably looking at one more generation. And honestly, my gut feeling is that SRAM was probably hoping that road brands would adopt it a little bit quicker. And I would bet almost anything that there was parallel development for whatever this new SRAM Red generation is going to be. I bet there was parallel development of both a T-type and standard rear derailleur, or maybe there will be both on this one anyway. We'll see. But yeah, as of right now, I feel like there's not enough. The adoption of UDH on the road is not widespread enough for SRAM to be able to get away, for them to pull off having exclusively a T-type red rear derailleur for this next generation.
Yeah, agreed.
It would be awfully interesting though, because like you were saying, Dave, with being able to crash and not have a hanger bent and that sort of thing. I mean, it really wasn't that long ago when we had companies like even Trek was making custom frames for their pro riders and teams that had non-replaceable rear derailleur hangers, so that they would be less prone to bending in a crash. And then you had companies like Wheels Manufacturing was making titanium derailleur hangers for Cervelo because those were less prone to bending, stuff like that. So we've seen efforts throughout the years of companies trying to make those replaceable derailleur hangers less replaceable.
And the sort of funny thing is that with Shimano having moved the crash mode button to the rear derailleur with the latest DA2, we're actually being forced down the road of SRAM's T-type derailleur.
Yeah. So,
yeah, and I guess that's another thing we haven't mentioned either is there. All these people. There's some speculation out there about how the adoption of UDH will sort of be a big problem for Shimano, and I don't think it will be, because UDH still has an accommodation for a regular derailleur hanger. I mean that's what it was presumably designed to be in the first place anyway. Again, we've kind of discussed the whole Trojan horse thing, but it's really just another format for bike brands to figure out, not Shimano necessarily.
Yeah, I was trying to look into whether other brands are allowed to use the mount for like to create their own T-type derailleur style. SRAM wasn't really willing to make any comment on that, but at the same time they didn't say they couldn't. So I mean, it's all possible that Shimano will come up with some variation of its own version that's backwards compatible with every frame that has adopted the standard, and that we see various other types of direct mount solutions. Shimano certainly played with direct mount derailleurs over the years, and the current generation of Shimano stuff uses its own kind of iteration of a direct mount. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very interesting space, and I think we will see frame design change as a result of it, especially given just how much that derailleur reinforces the whole dropout system, and how much it can serve as a especially on a road bike, if you were to lay down the bike, that derailleur would serve as a protectant to the rear end of the frame. So it's, for me, I think that's a very exciting development for road bike design.
Yep, agreed for sure. Dave, you got anything on your mind this week?
No, not really.
Okay.
I'm trying to get, obviously, but that would be kind of sad if not, but I've just been sleeping. Just trying to get some reviews done, so can't say when it'll come out, but very focused on classified hub system at the moment. I'm trying to wrap that up after months of testing.
Okay. Well, looking forward to that one for sure. Well, okay, if you don't have anything on your mind this week that you want to discuss in this segment, I'm going to go ahead and drop my second one, and that would be particularly after speaking to the people at Bosch and roaming the halls at Eurobike just in the last few weeks. It really does seem to me that a lot, if not most, of the major new developments in mountain bike stuff seems to be geared more toward e-bikes instead of human-powered, non-powered bikes. And like a few notable things would be, like SRAM transmission, for example, an awful lot of tires, the Bosch ABS system that basically requires that you have a battery on your bike. These are all big developments, I feel like, and they all have e-bikes in mind. I mean, SRAM is not, they're not super kind of overt about how transmission was designed for e-bikes, but just given how it shifts, it seems pretty clear to me that it was designed with e-bikes in mind primarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the way it's speed limited to only shift one cog at a time was definitely designed with the idea of immense power being put through the drivetrain with each shift. And I think I'd heard something similar suggested to me with Shimano that in future, like all mountain bike products were being built with e-bikes in mind, and especially like if we were to see new Di2, which we've now seen it released for e-bikes, but not for analog mountain bikes. But yeah, any next iteration of Di2 would be basically e-bike first, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing when you're talking about something like a drivetrain, because the result is a drivetrain that is superior under power, that is also probably reinforced to handle the weight of an e-bike landing on it. I think generally speaking, everyone's bikes benefit from this kind of design focus around being more robust.
Yeah, I mean, the increase in robustness and just being designed to handle that additional drive torque in general, I think is a good thing. I am just a little hesitant and a little worried, I guess, so to speak, that kind of what we might be giving up in return for that robustness. And I know, Dave, you and I seem to have differing opinions on the transmission stuff in particular, because
it seems we do.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy having the ability to shift up or down a whole bunch of gears in one fell swoop. And I don't particularly love how, as you said, transmission is speed limited, which again for e-bikes is fantastic because it does prevent things like busted chains and breaking teeth off of cassettes and that sort of thing. But if you are already accustomed to, or if you're an experienced rider who kind of understands kind of like some of the nuances in terms of shifting under power and that sort of thing, it's kind of a bummer that you can't shift a whole bunch of gears in one swoop anymore, because I mean you do lose something in that.
Yeah, there are times where I miss having that with new transmission, like where you're kind of having to wait for the derailleur to catch up. But at the same time, I've learned to not shift with any skill. It's kind of made me relearn how to shift. Like I was always pretty proud with how I could sprint and not break a chain and all that. Like I was, I felt like I was a very experienced user of derailleurs in a sense. Like I knew how to time a shift, and that was something that I didn't really love about electronic shifting, is that it kind of removed that tactile feeling of being able to time the shift. You didn't really know when to back off the power versus when the shift would enact. But with transmission, I've kind of just become accustomed to just not backing off the power and pushing the button and just hearing it pop into place. And at first I was doing it trying to break it, and now I'm doing it just because I can. And it actually has changed kind of the way I'll ride, because now I find myself doing shifts where I wouldn't have dared do before, like mid-technical kind of climb. I'll just hit the button and just wait for the shift, just keep the power down and wait for the shift to happen. And that's how an e-bike's ridden, and it's kind of influenced how I ride now, which is... for me, it's quite interesting. And even going back to like 12-speed Shimano mechanicals, very good in that regard, shifting under power. But it's still, I find myself kind of wincing a little bit when I use that technique of just full power maneuvers while mid-gear shifting with even that system. It just doesn't seem to like it as much. And in that sense, I'm pretty fond of transmission. But I do understand that it's why you want multiple gear shifts.
But even looking outside of transmission, I mean, that's just one example. It does still seem like pretty much all of the new, I shouldn't say all, but pretty much all of the real exciting technological development for mountain bike stuff, a lot of it does seem to be kind of focused or have e-bikes in mind, because certainly a lot of them are powered. A lot of them require power. One thing that I saw at your bike in terms of like gearbox development, a lot of those were coupled with e-assist motors, because those do help kind of overcome the extra drag of a gearbox. I just find it interesting because having seen numbers not just from Bosch but just sort of a bunch of other companies in general, we've already known that particularly in Europe, e-mountain bikes already outsell analog mountain bikes. That happened quite a while ago, I think. It hasn't happened yet in the US, but it seems like that is probably an inevitability as well. It just makes me wonder, at what point does that pendulum swing all the way in that direction, and the predominant amount of development work for mountain bike technology it does end up focused very overtly on e-bikes instead of analog bikes. It just seems like it's coming.
I think we're already there. And I think if you look at a lot of the European brands, there's a few brands like Rottwild, for example, that are basically just e-bike brands now. And I think I think we're already there in terms of the biggest manufacturers designing for e-bikes. I think we were there 2 or 3 years ago already. I think all drivetrains on the market today are e-bike optimized. And then there's the exception where you've got, again, SRAM transmission. XXSL is not for e-bike use. They specifically say do not use this on an e-bike. And my take of that is that they've basically designed the drivetrain for e-bike use, and then they've said, okay, now how do we make it lighter for cross-country? And we're willing to sacrifice absolute strength and robustness, and we'll basically reuse the technology but just change a few materials here and there. And we now know it's not strong enough for e-bike use, but it'll please a racing market. And I think we'll probably just see more of that kind of backwards engineering.
Yeah, it does seem that way, because ultimately, if you're a product R&D person and you're looking at the prospect of developing 2 of something versus developing 1 of something, you're probably going to develop the 1 and just have it accommodate both. And if you're going to choose one side of that coin to compromise, you're probably going to compromise the analog side, unfortunately.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's my thought on that. That's not really necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just something that I've observed. So we'll see where that goes. All right. Well, I have one PSA, if you don't mind my sharing that, and then we can wrap up. So public service announcement for today. It's another mountain bike related thing, and I just want to remind everyone out there.
Gravel bike.
Or could be a gravel bike, basically any bike that has a sliding suspension, telescoping suspension element. But consider this your public service announcement that you are probably overdue to service the oil bath in your suspension fork, because if you don't remember the last time you've done it, it's probably time. And my guess is that you probably also haven't noticed the kind of slow and steady degradation in the performance of that suspension fork. And if you were to go ahead and redo that oil bath, you'd probably be amazed at how good your suspension fork used to feel.
I would add to that, like the biggest reason to change that oil bath is for it's kind of preventative maintenance. You get all the dirt out from underneath the seals, and that dirt that gets stuck underneath the seals is what kind of abrades away at the system, most notably like the sliding surfaces. So the stanchions can get scored, and then it's a very expensive repair bill once your fork starts leaking. So that's kind of why the brands recommend doing it so frequently, is to almost guarantee against such wear. But I would extend that PSA to all telescoping components of your bike. So it applies to the rear shock and also your dropper post.
Dropper post. Mm-hmm.
How frequently is it recommended you do that?
50 hours.
Yeah,
normally.
like it varies a little bit from brand to brand, but yeah, 50 hours of riding time is usually the recommendation. But I think if some people were to actually do the math, I would bet that there are people running them out there for like 500 hours.
Yeah.
And just not even thinking about it. But generally speaking, I would say for most riders, at minimum once a season, like absolute bare minimum, but more likely it's probably 2 to 3 times a season. And it's one of those things that seems very daunting, as a daunting task, but it's actually incredibly simple to do. It's literally a 10-minute process if you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're talking about half an hour and maybe a little bit of mess, but it's not that big of a deal. And that's definitely a process that is very well worth learning how to do it, because it does have a very big impact on your fork, suspension component or sliding components in general, not just in terms of performance, but as Dave said, it also could prevent a very, very big repair bill down the road. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And that massive repair bill is far more common than most people realize. I mean, a busy bike shop would probably have multiple examples every week of scored stanchions and worn out dropper posts. Shafts and yeah, like buggered up rear shocks and
100%.
It's a very, very commonly neglected area of the bike. And yeah, I think every 50 hours is probably on the conservative side, but it's yeah, as James says, if you do it minimum once a year, and if you're riding a lot, 2-3 times a year, you'll be absolutely great. And in terms of skill set wise, yeah, it's not super difficult to do just the splash oil, and I'd liken it to probably bleeding a brake in terms of difficulty.
Oh, like I would almost say it's easier, because yeah, like it's hard to mess up. It's if you're a person who doesn't think too much about changing the oil in your engine, for example, this is way easier, but and not a completely dissimilar concept. You know,
I've definitely seen people mess it up though, so I'm gonna say
okay, fair.
Yeah,
it's not impossible to mess up, but it's not super hard. It's not super easy. It's not super hard to mess up.
Yeah, and it doesn't. You can generally get away with it with very basic tools as well.
Yeah, yep, totally. So, all right. Well, anyway, that will wrap up our show for today. As I mentioned earlier in the show, and this show is completely member funded. So if you are not already a member of the Escape Collective, please head over to escapecollective.com. We're actually running a special right now for the Tour de France. So there's a little bit of a discount, I believe, for membership. Yeah, how about that? And if you are already a member, I guess, as I said earlier, please tell your friends about Escape Collective, because it certainly does make this thing a more viable thing if we get more members. So it's just something to keep in mind. And if you're listening to this podcast, if you're a regular listener and you listen to us week in, week out, and you are not a member, well, maybe consider becoming a member, because it'd be pretty helpful. I'm not going to give you the guilt trip, but that'll be my subtle reminder. But also, if you are
James almost looked angry there.
Yeah, if you are also a regular listener and you like what you hear on Geek Warning, please make sure you head over to iTunes and give us a rating and review, because that certainly does help grow our audience and helps the show in general. So that would be very much appreciated. That's all we got for today. So unless either of you have anything else to add, that'll wrap it up for this week, and we'll see you next week on Geek Warning.